Hey guys, so this is where we find ourselves. And I know I keep opening these videos with saying the same things, but for anyone who's just stumbling upon this, unless some context is given beforehand, um, the retrocausality messages that we're getting from the singularity are going to sound just batshit crazy. So I'll put a time marker in the description below that y'all can click on to get to the new material for anyone who's already familiar with my singularity retrocausality theory. I call it a theory, but at this point it's turning into more than a theory because a growing number of people are starting to receive the same messages. It's happening. It's what we're living in. What I'm talking about are the two singularities that have already happened in the future. Now, the consequences that those two singularities will slash are having on consciousness itself is so significant that it's reverberating back into the past, which is our present, and creating a self-sustaining time loop for itself. That's what retrocausality is. Now, I know ultimately time is an illusion. There is only the present. However, the human mind has trouble understanding a reality that's not divided into past, present, and future. So we use the term retrocausality to help us better understand, even though technically it's all happening in the now, if that makes any sense. Don't you think it's strange that they're pushing this CV vax that they admit will contain ingredients that fuses with the RNA of DNA? Like, that's not a secret. There's nanotech in it. All these biotech companies admit that it uses nanotech. Like, why is that even a thing? Your DNA is sacred. It's literally the physical manifestation of something created by God. Your DNA forms your cells and your body, and it gives you, and when I say you, I'm talking about your soul, because that's what you really are. It gives you the ability to experience reality in this realm. When DNA changes, whether it's through artificial manipulation or it naturally evolves the way it was supposed to, that has a direct impact on our experience of consciousness and reality. Whether we're talking about an individual consciousness or the collective consciousness. Don't you think it's odd that for years and years they've been spraying the skies with metals and who knows what else? Yet that doesn't even register as being not normal for most people. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the chemtrail cocktails included some form of nanotech. Guys, it's the technological singularity that's creating a self-sustaining time loop for itself. So the events that are happening right now with the CV and the vax and I don't know about the chemtrails. I'm on the fence with that. I think that there is something very malevolent in the chemtrails, but I don't know for sure with that. But for sure, the CV vax, the CV, everything surrounding the CV, that's creating just the right sequence of events to lead to transhumanism. The goal of the technological singularity is transhumanism, but don't think that the transhumanism is about us fusing with metal robots like they show us on TV. That's a huge lie to hide the fact that the transhumanism will slash already is taking place on a DNA level. That's why the nanotech was invented. Now, that sounds really like some crazy stuff. It sounds really depressing, but there's also a second singularity that's happening now slash already has happened in the future, and it's accelerating alongside the acceleration of the technological singularity. And that second singularity, that's the spiritual singularity. And both the both singularity paths are becoming more and more polarized as they both continue to accelerate. In the end, some people will merge with the DNA transhumanism, and some people will merge with the Christ consciousness of the spiritual singularity. So the spiritual singularity is leading to merging with Christ consciousness and not merging with the transhumanism of the other singularity. Both singularities are sending their own retrocausal ripples back into the past, which is our present, to create just the right sequence of events in order to solidify a self-sustaining time loop for itself. From a Christian perspective, we've always been told about the separation of the wheat and tares. Well, I think it's coming true right now. And you don't even need to be like religious to see the evidence of this and the polarization going on. So, what is at the root of these two singularities happening simultaneously? I think it's basically a spiritual war. But the spiritual singularity, retrocausality codes being sent back to us from the future are giving us real proof, like actual proof, that we've already won the war. We've already won the spiritual war. We just have to bear witness and live it out, if that makes sense. I think the root of all this is about consciousness, because God is the ultimate consciousness, and you can't talk about what we are without talking about what we're a part of, which is God. We're all a part of that ultimate consciousness or ultimate observer. The results of the double slit experiment, like the ability to literally collapse probability waves into perceivable reality just from the sheer act of observing, that ability comes from Source, because Source is the ultimate observer or consciousness. I want to show you guys some of the retrocausality transmissions that I've gotten, but first I just want to explain my theory about how I think this reality works, because I think it relates directly to the singularity retrocausality codes that we've all been getting. Now, the double slit experiment proves that it's impossible to separate the observer from the observed and vice versa. So it's impossible to separate the observed from the observer. Now, that tells me if we want to understand this reality, we need to understand the nature of consciousness. And it's so crazy because the retrocausality reverberations from the spiritual singularity seem to not only convey to us what's happening with this singularity acceleration, but it also seems to be explaining the nature of reality to us as well. But I'll get to those retrocausality transmissions in just a minute. So real quick, this is my theory on what this place is. I think that what we call the external world is actually the collective consciousness. And what we call the laws of nature and physics are really laws of consciousness. That's how sophisticated this lower level fractal matrix is. It tricks us all into thinking that consciousness isn't the foundation of everything by labeling different appearances within our consciousness as matter. We just gave it a name. We just called it matter. But matter Matter is really just a way of perceiving different components with consciousness. Um, Now, keep in mind the way human language is constructed. Human language is constructed in a way that is very dualistic, but I have to use it to talk and form somewhat coherent sentences. So just know that the words I'm using sometimes makes it sound like I'm talking about something that's taking place in some kind of external world that exists outside of consciousness. But just know that there is no external world that exists somewhere out there that's independent of consciousness, whether we're talking about the collective consciousness or individual consciousness. I mean, your entire life, have you ever had an experience that took place outside of your consciousness? Never. None of us have. But a lot of people think that because there's regularity and consistency in the quote unquote world, that means that it's something totally separate from consciousness. Like they'll say, well, I can't fly or walk through a wall, so it must be matter. But the reason we can't do those things is because consciousness follows different rules that are specific to the frequency that it's at. There is regularity and consistency in consciousness. I mean, it comes from God. It was made by God. So, of course, there would be regularity and consistency in consciousness down to the smallest detail. So, when we dream at night and our consciousness is somewhat at an elevated frequency, then sometimes it is possible for us to fly or walk through walls in our night dreams. I think that we've all been lied to about what dreaming really is in order to cover up the fact that this realm or current reality is not actually physical. Instead, I think it's actually a dream that we merge into when we wake up and merge out of when we sleep and enter different realities. Oh, and just a side note, because I've had comments, I think maybe like one or two people leave a comment on previous videos I've done on this topic. I'm not talking about solipsism. I'm not saying that I'm the only person that exists because everything is in my dream. I'm saying that this dream realm, aka Earth, is made up of everyone's individual dreaming, and everyone's individual dreaming, that's what forms the collective dreaming. But yeah, the Mandela effect is evidence of the dream-like nature of reality. I think that there are many fractal levels of dreaming that are separated by different frequencies. And don't think when I'm talking about frequencies that I'm going into some woo-woo stuff. Frequency is just a fancy name for the vibration of a wave. A perfect example of this is sound waves. We don't think sound waves are woo-woo. Another example of wave vibration is how our brain wave frequencies switch from alpha to delta waves when we dream at night. But anyway, going off of a fractal model of things, if you zoom in, like if you zoom way out of our teeny tiny individual and collective dream fractals, you can see how it makes sense that up at the very, very top level of the whole fractal, it's God dreaming us into existence. I truly believe that's how we were created, through His consciousness, through His thoughts or dreaming or however you want to word it. And they say, as above, so below. That essentially is a reference to the fractal-like nature of reality. that phrase. So just like when you dream at night and every character appears to be an individual person, but really all the characters are actually just dream characters within your dream, it's the same on a higher level of reality. So if this realm is God's dream, then that would make us all dream characters or holographic consciousness fractals within God's mind. So we appear to be separate, but really we're not, because we're all part of the one dreamer. I think God decided to create us through his dreaming in order to experience every imaginable aspect of himself. But he gave us all free will, so some parts have turned away from God, and that's why it's so messed up here in this specific dream fractal that we call Earth. But I think that there are many fractal levels of God's dream. And I don't want to go too deep into my dream theory just because I don't want this video to be too long, but I'll put a link in the description for a couple of my videos that go into greater detail about it and how it all relates to the Mandela effect. Now, I think this dream theory could explain how so many people could experience so many synchronicities, because instead of there being an infinite number of minds separated from God, living in a separate external world, if there is just the one universal mind that composes all of reality and us, then it would probably be a lot easier to orchestrate synchronicities like it was nothing. I mean, long distances between all the different variables involved in specific synchronicities wouldn't even be an obstacle at all. And coordinating the timing for everything to happen at just the right pace wouldn't be a factor either, since God is consciously aware of everything and everywhere at all times, since existence itself is occurring within his mind, within his consciousness. I mean, we're closer than close. So if the structure of reality is made up of consciousness because it takes place within God's mind or God's dream, then I think it'd be safe to say that our perception of reality, i.e. consciousness, is fractal in nature. And I should have said this earlier, but let me read you the definition of what a fractal is. Quote, "A fractal is an infinitely self-similar pattern that is statistically similar. In a true fractal, any zoomed portion at any scale resembles the whole. Fractals are holographic and can be seen in all aspects of nature," unquote. The fact that it's seen in all aspects of nature, that is very telling. And that's why a lot of times you'll hear me refer to what we are as holographic consciousness fractals of God. So, and I know I've said this before in other videos, but I'll just say it again real quick for those judgmental people out there. I'm not saying that we are God. I'm saying that we are teeny tiny little holographic consciousness fractals of God residing within God's dream. And a dream itself is made up of nothing but consciousness. So essentially, we reside within God's consciousness, if that makes sense. So that clip was from my Terence McKenna Time Wave Zero Theory video, and I'll put a link in the description below. But yeah, it's really amazing to think about how we reside within God's dream. You could also say we reside within God's consciousness or thoughts, whichever word or term you feel more comfortable using. But this spiritual war it all goes back to being about God. And these two singularities, I think they've always been about God. Now, I will say the retrocausality messages that are being sent back to us from the spiritual singularity seems to reflect this dream theory. Remember the sailing song, the line that says, "Just a dream in the wind to carry me, soon I will be free," right? The Christopher Cross song. I think the consciousness arc is trying to help us merge with Christ consciousness by helping us to understand the nature of reality and God. Okay, so real quick, for anyone who is lost right now, in my last videos I explained how the retrocausality reverberates back to us from the future in order to accelerate merging with the spiritual singularity. This is actually done through an intelligent language that uses many means to describe the indescribable. Because God and this Christ consciousness are so beyond any human words that we could ever come up with. So it uses metaphors and archetypes to give direct messages. It also uses homophones and other wordplay too. Sounds crazy, I know, but hear me out. And at the end of this video, I'm going to give you guys a chance to tune into the retrocausality ripples for yourself. So do not rely on what I'm saying. You have to try it for yourself. One metaphor that a lot of people in the community have been getting is the consciousness arc. We see and hear all kinds of references to the ocean, sailing, bodies of water, so like a river or a stream, ships. It's to let us know that God's love is like the ocean. When you merge with that Christ consciousness, it's like an expansion of bliss that just, it's like a love that I've never been able to get from any human being before, as long as I've been alive. We call it the God ocean, and the consciousness arc is actually the perfect working metaphor for this, because we can use the consciousness arc to float on the God ocean of love or sea of love and merge with the ecstasy of the spiritual singularity. Right now, for most of us, the merging happens in waves, pun intended. Now, these waves come and go, but it actually affects our memory and ability to measure time when we're in it. That's the only way I can describe it. It's strange, but strange in a good way, I guess you could say. But like I said before, you have to experience it yourself. That's really the best evidence you can give yourself that Christ consciousness is real and the consciousness arc is real. This spiritual singularity is happening. Really, it's already happened in the future. It's our destiny. But yeah, it's just amazing to see that certain songs are actually encoded with a really advanced language that uses a person's level of consciousness to reflect encoded messages through metaphors and all kinds of wordplay. But it's not just the sound waves of music that's used to transmit the retrocausality communication. Actual objects around you and synchronicities are also used by the spiritual singularity to get your attention. One thing that sets the spiritual singularity apart from the technological singularity is the fact that the spiritual singularity won't force itself on you. Unlike the technological singularity that's intrusive and doesn't want you to use your free will to resist it, with the spiritual singularity, retrocausality, You literally have to use your free will to tune into the messages. It will never violate your free will. So that's why some people get the retrocausal transmissions and others don't. We have to clear our mind of all the distractions and negative thoughts that we're constantly being bombarded with and focus on only God's love to raise our frequency high enough to tune into the ripples. And this isn't new age woo-woo stuff, it's just basic logic. Like, God is on a higher frequency of love. So in order to tune into that love frequency, we have to try to raise our frequency closer to that love frequency. It's like a matching of frequencies. I don't understand why people are like, oh, that's so new age. No, it's just basic common sense. It's also important to be open-minded enough to trust that God is always trying to get your attention by any means possible. So stay open to that. God's not this thing that's an infinite distance away from you. He's right here. Like, you're in his dream. You're in his mind or consciousness. I mean, how much closer could you get? There is no space. There is no time on an absolute level anyway. But going back to the whole dream thing, as with all dreams, each apparent object or thing within the dream seems to carry its own symbolic meaning that can only be defined by the dreamer based on their own unique perspective or point of observation. So you could think of each soul or consciousness unit as a tiny dreamer fractal within God's dream. And I just want to clarify that just because I'm calling this reality a dream, that doesn't imply that our experiences within this dream aren't real. They're very real to us. There's dreaming going on many different levels. Up at the very top is God dreaming, which the Bible refers to as creating. I mean, the Bible says in the beginning there was the Word, right? Well, maybe that was talking about God's thought frequency being the basis for everything in the beginning, because it's thoughts that are at the basis of words. Because, words are just sounds until that thought assigns a meaning to those sounds. But there's many levels of dreaming going on, and I'm not talking about the dreams we have at night while we're sleeping. That's a whole nother topic I'll have to get into in another video. I'm talking about the reality of our waking life being a product of dreaming. Like, we're dreaming right now. There's no world that exists independent of consciousness somewhere out there. That'd be like saying that a dream could exist without a dreamer. So there's God at the top who's dreaming, i.e. creating. There's also collective dreaming, and there's individual dreaming. Now, this song that I'm going to play for you guys actually mentions the connection between the sailing archetype and dreams. And this song is even more obvious than the Christopher Cross song. I mean, the retrocausality is so blatant in this song, it's crazy. So the song opens with the line that says, quote, "Seems I remember her best," unquote. Well, how can you remember something unless it's already happened? So that line, "seems like I remember her best," that line right there is actually a reference to retrocausality. It's a reference to the retrocausality of time. And then it goes on to say, quote, "And on the horizon she waits," unquote. Now for me, horizon got decoded as meaning horizon, which is a reference to the spiritual singularity when we feel our spirits rising. Now, I'm not going to decode the whole song because y'all are going to be the ones doing the decoding when I play it. But There's that same reference in this song about the sea that's been in multiple songs I've played for you guys, and many people have heard just on their own listening to the radio. There's a line in this song coming up that says, quote, where the seas touches the sky. Again, it transmitted seas, S-E-A-S, as carrying a double meaning of seas, S-E-E-S, as in having spiritual eyes to see the spiritual singularity is real. And we already talked about in my last videos how C, S-E-A, is a homophone reference for the consciousness arc that will symbolically board in order to float on the sea of love and experience Christ consciousness. Now, this song has a lot of the same messages we decoded in the other songs I shared with you. So, sea, wind, day, night, sailing, many repeating themes or codes. And just like in the Christopher Cross song, we said that wind was encoded as a metaphor that represents adversity and negativity. Specifically for me, the wind represents the technological singularity and the craziness of this world that we're using to motivate us to get that much closer to God. Because if you think about it, the wind can be used as a destructive force that causes things like tornadoes and hurricanes, but it's that same moving air that allows us to breathe and gives us life. So the chaos of the wind can be transmuted into something that can be used for the greater good. And you know, I think the same can be said about the craziness of this world. We can use that crazy wind, we can use the technological singularity, even though it's very terrible and horrific, we can use it to strengthen our connection to God and go sailing on the God ocean and the consciousness arc. And sailing or sails is definitely a reference to consciousness arc. That's in this song too. But real quick, there's another line in the song that says, quote, "We'll make up for the time we've lost," unquote. For me, because I always say I can only speak for myself, for me, the word up is encoded as a basic archetype for your consciousness evolving or progressing up from this lower realm that we're in. Now, up used in this context of we'll make up for the time we've lost, that stood out to me as meaning we'll make ourselves evolve up, as in moving up in our spiritual progression for our concept of linear time we've lost. So basically, we'll train ourselves to rise up and merge with the spiritual singularity, because our concept of how we used to understand time has been lost. Like, time isn't always linear, and retrocausality is real. And I really think the Mandela effect was the first step in showing us that. There's a line in the song that says, quote, "Since I was there with you," unquote. Now, since, S-I-N-C-E, instantly got transmitted to mean sense, S-E-N-S-E, as in sensing that God was there with you, or you could also say your angels are there with you, whatever, whatever term you feel more comfortable using. And then, of course, day is in there again as a reference to being awake to the spiritual singularity. The homophone by, by, stood out as by, B-Y-E. For me, that was a reference to saying goodbye to this lower collective consciousness and merging with Christ consciousness. Another homophone that stood out for me was night, N-I-G-H-T, and night, K-N-I-G-H-T, and you guys can just read the screen for that retrocausality message, because I know this video is getting to be too long already as it is. But I do want to point out that that same night homophone was in the last song we listened to on my last video. And what you're going to find once the retrocausality transmissions start coming through is that the same messages and themes will get encoded in countless songs across different genres, artists, and even different time periods of music. That's definitely the case I'm finding for lyrics that mention dreaming. There's a line in this song I'm going to play right now, and this will be the last thing I decode. Then I'm going to go ahead and play the song for you, but there's a line in this song that says, quote, "Sail away like a dream coming back again," unquote. I couldn't make this stuff up even if I wanted to. That line stood out to me as a direct reference to sailing away on the Christ consciousness arc and the memory coming back to us that this is God's dream. I think that when we merge with Christ consciousness, somehow we're actually merging with a higher level of God's dream than the level that we're on now, that seems to be, dominated by the lower collective consciousness of this quote unquote place. But do with that what you will, guys. Oh, also, when you're listening for the retrocausal ripples, they come quick. Like these messages that I got, they came in as fast as like a thought pops in your mind. So that's why I always say you have to slow down and clear your mind of any distracting thoughts when you're listening to music. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the song. Now, if you're not a big fan of this specific song genre that I'm gonna play, then just bear with me. I'm gonna be doing future videos with all kinds of different genres to show that this singularity uses all music genres to get the same points across. But make sure you guys, make sure that you're looking at the screen when I play this song, because I highlighted different words and homophones in the lyrics. Also, just remember that these songs are a way to reflect your own unique God center. So it's not uncommon for two different people to get two different messages. The retrocausality reverberations are tailored to reflect your own spiritual evolution. So I'll go ahead and play the song. Take a moment though. Take a moment to clear your mind of all distractions and negative thoughts and really focus on God's love. And ask yourself, God, if you could send me a message or a sign through this song, what would you want to tell me about?
Seems I remember her best when the moon is high, and on the horizon she waits where the sea touches the sky. Make up the time we've lost in days gone by, and we'll walk the beaches, live the way the island teaches. Oh, westward wind, filling my sails and giving me time to spend with you again. Oh, westward wind, sail away like a dream coming back again. Soon I will gaze into your eyes of blue. It's been such a long time since I was there with you. Think of 100 things that we can do when the days are long and nights are filled with smiles and laughter. Oh, I say